Let me do it in the funky Asian. Huh?
That's freezing cold in there as well.
They got heat.
Breathe very heavily.
Lovely, thank you so much.
Okay, Rabbi Say, this is one of the sugyois chamurois in Shas. Pagina Debura, I don't claim to come here tonight and tell you that I have pshat in the sugya. It's begeder dage belev ish yisachenu lacherim. I think we'll have some group therapy here about the sugya, and we'll discuss it together, as opposed to me telling you what the pshat is, because I really have many difficulties, and perhaps together one head is better than two heads are better than one. And Mamela, I hope that you'll be able to help me out. So let's start. Tanu Rabbanan. Yeah, the sugya starts. Tanu Rabbanan. Evet shehevi gittin v'kosav by atzmacha nechosai knuyin lach. So he comes with a star, and it says atzmacha nechosai. Atzmai kana nechosim loy kana. He's kind of himself, but he's not kind of the nechosim. Why not? Rashi says, because he has to say b'fon nechtam ki isha hamavia gita. He has to say b'fon nechtam, and b'fon nechtam only works on atzmai. The neman hua shichrur elay b'fon nechtam ve'ein tzachedem l'kaima, but nechosim loykana the boy edim kashar kiyim shtaris. So basically, you only have kiyim on the evet, but you don't have kiyim on the nechosim. Okay. So you've all seen Rabbi Kiva Eger's kasha here, and really it's the Tesis Ritz kasha, right on the side over here on the page. Tesis Ritz brings down Rashi Pirush HaMoira, the Neman Wal Shechur Eloim Van Anech, the Vein Tzachedem L'Kaim, Nechosim L'Kana, the Boy Edom L'Kaim Kashar Kiyim Shtaris. The Egna nearly, he doesn't like it. Why doesn't the Tesis Ritz like it? Rabbi Kiva Eger doesn't like it for the same reason. Because later on in Daf Chav Gimel Amid Beis in the Mishnah, Mishnah says that a Isha Atzma Mavias Gita, Avovachi Tzrich Eloim V'Nech V'Nechtam. The Isha herself that brings a get needs to say V'Nech V'Nechtam. And the Gemara asks, Isha Mechimata Gita L'Yad Eger Shelah. The Gemara asks that as soon as the Isha is divorced, she doesn't have to say V'Nech V'Nechtam anymore. As soon as she gets the Gerushin, as soon as she's Meguresh, she does not have to say V'Nech V'Nechtam anymore. And the Gemara gives a whole, far-fetched case of where she becomes a shliach la'ilacha until she gets to a certain makam, and then she becomes a shliach la'kabbalah, and that's the case where she has v'nech v'nechtam. But other than that, if a isha is megureshes right away, she brings that get afterwards to Eretz Yisrael, so it's not v'nech v'nechtam. So why does Rashi resort to such a far-fetched case that the Eved was a shliach la'ilacha, and then he became a shliach la'kabbalah, and he says v'nech v'nechtam, and he's only named to say it himself, and not in the nechasim? Why can't Rashi give the regular case of an Eved that was Makabal his get shechra, and he's not Neman on his nechasim, on the nechasim, but he doesn't have to say V'nechtam on himself. Right? He's believed in that V'nechtam. That's Rashi. That's the Kiveger's kasha. Why does Rashi resort to such a far-fetched case? Why can Rashi say simple? Rashi should say that the Isha, the Evet came, he's already Meshuchra. He doesn't have to say V'nech V'nechtam because he's already Meshuchra. What about the Nechasim? On the Nechasim, he doesn't have Kiyum. As long as he doesn't have Kiyum, he doesn't get it. So Rabbi Kiva Eger answers, he says, because should that be the case, that there's no Kiyum here, should we be talking about a case where there's no Kiyum? He was already Meshuchra and you don't need Kiyum for himself. That has nothing to do with Pagina Debura. The sugi over here is the opening. Tanu Rabbanan is the opening statement of Pagina Dibura. That's where we begin Pagina Dibura. If the Gemara should be talking about a case where there's no kiyum necessary because the evidence is already meshuchra, there's no kiyum necessary. So what does Pagina Dibura have to do with anything? He's already meshuchra. He doesn't have Sefer Nechtam. He doesn't need kiyum. And the Gabbat and Nechasim, he does need kiyum. So it's just basically he has a vulnerable star. It's pretty much a vulnerable star. The star is vulnerable towards the Nechasim, because Ben the Nechasim are Chayshish for Ziyuf. The Gabbat and Nechasim are Chayshish for Ziyuf, you need kiyum. And the Gabbat himself, you don't need kiyum. Right? Because he's already meshuchra. So it's not this Pagina Dibura. The star, which is non-Bekuyim, is enough to set him free, but it's not enough to give him Nechasim. It's not the Pagina Dibura. That's why Rashi says, no, we're dealing with a case of B'fana Nechta Fana Nechtam. This radical case of where he was a Shlich Lo'ilachim, and he became a Shlich L'Kabbalah afterwards, like the Gemara says, Daf Chav Daled, and he has to say B'fana Nechta Fana Nechtam, and The Palgina Dibur over here is, Pashtas, that he, when he says B'fanech V'nechtam, he's only Neman to be Mekayin, the star, as far as he's concerned, but not be Mekayim the star as far as the Nechasim are concerned. That's the Palgina Dibura. Palgina. So now, why is that Palgina? Pashtas, you could ask Rabbi Akiva, but why is that Palgina? Why is that any better? You could say that before Nechtam, even though he's been Mekayim it, but that Kiyam is a vulnerable Kiyam. It's enough to believe him, Lagaba himself, but not enough to believe him, Lagaba the Nechasim. It's not the Palgina Dibura. Right? It's an amonis which is a little bit shaky, and it's enough to only believe him, but not enough to believe him, Lagaba the Nechasim, only Lagaba himself. Fight, not with Palgina Dibura. Apparently, Rabbi Akiva doesn't understand it that way. Apparently, Rabbi Akiva understands that every B'fanei Nechtam is a 100% Memanas. It's not just a 50% and we allowed you to get away with 50%. That's not what it is. It's 100% Memanas. And that Memanas essentially should work for the entire star, no matter what it says in the star. Even if the star says that you get Nechasim, but once we know B'fanei Nechtam that the star is Mekuyim, it should work for anything in the star, including Nechasim. And that's why you have to come with Palgina Dibura. Palgina Dibura says no. It only works for yourself and not for the Nechasim. So that's one thing you see in Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva Nemzon, he assumes, Rabbi Akiva's assumption, he assumes that B'fanech V'nechtam is a 100% Kiyum. And it should be working even for the Nechasim. And that's where the Sugi of Palgina Dibura comes in, right, kicks in, that only because of Palgina Dibura, you don't accept this Kiyum Lagaba the Nechasim, but you accept it Lagaba the Yavet. Now let's analyze Divrei, Devar Makdoshim Shel Hagoyin Rabbi Akiva Eiger. Yeah? What's Palgina Dibura over here? What's the case of Palgina Dibura in the Gemara? It says in the Shtar Kol Nechasai. Right? It says in the Shtar Kol Nechasai. And he's Mekayim, he says B'fanei Nechtam on Kol Nechasai. Right? So where's the Palgina Dibura exactly? But Kiveger's Mavur, the Palgina Dibura is on the words of the Evet, not the Kol Nechasai. Because again, Rabbi Kiveger started off that should there not be B'fanei Nechtam, should there be no need to say B'fanei Nechtam, then there wouldn't be an Indian of Palgina Dibura here. Why? Because you just say, listen, the star is a vulnerable star. It's only enough to assume that it's a good star, Lagabe himself, but not Lagabe Nechasim. But now that he's saying B'fanei Nechtam, so now Banu l'machloikas le'inyan l'sugi shel Palgina Dibura. Only now can we consider this concept of Palgina Dibura, only because we're saying B'fanei Nechtam, only because we're dealing with a case of B'fanei Nechtam. That means Rabbi Akiva Eiger is understanding that the whole Palgina Dibura, the sugi of Palgina Dibura is B'negeya the B'fanei Nechtam, not B'negeya the Kol Nechasei and the star. That's Rabbi Akiva Eiger's understanding. Because Rabbi Akiva Eiger is saying that if not for B'fanei Nechtam, if not for the Eved's B'fanei Nechtam, there would be no need for Palgina Dibura. Even though he would be free, but the Nechasim he wouldn't get, but that wouldn't be Medin Palgina Dibura. That would be only because the star is a type of star which is vulnerable towards the Nechasim, and we have to assume that it's Mezuyif. But Lagab himself, we don't assume that it's Mezuyif, because Mishimeguna, for whatever reason, we don't assume that it's Mezuyif. Nothing to do with Palgina Dibura. It's only because that Eved is saying B'fanei Nechtam that all of a sudden we're entertaining, now we're coming to the sugi of Palgina Dibura. That's what Kiveger is saying. So if that's the case, so the $1 billion question, or make it a £1.5 billion question, right? No, it's a £500 million question, whatever it is. Yeah, so whatever it is, yeah, so then why does it matter what it says in the star? Kol Nechasei or Atzmach Nechasei? Who cares what it says in the star? If the Palgina Dibura is only B'negeya, B'fanei Nechtam, so why when it says Atzmach Nechasei in the star, is there no problem with Palgina Dibura? There, Rabbi is also Moida that Atzmai Kana Nechasem Loikana. If the Indian of the sugi over here, the sugi of Palgina Dibura is only because he's saying B'fanei Nechtam, and you have a kiyum which should take place Lagabe Atzmai and Lagabe the Nechasim, and yet we say no, it's only Lagabe Atzmai, not Lagabe the Nechasim. That's why there's a Palgina Dibura here. So why in the world should it make a difference what it says in the star, whether it says in the star Atzmach Nechasai or Kol Nechasai? Either way, it's Palgina Dibura. Because B'fanei Nechtam requires you to accept the star as a whole. It's a kiyum, it's 100% kiyum, and we don't do that. So it doesn't really matter what the star, what it says in the star. L'chayr that you have a plugin debura even when it says in the star atzmacha nechasai. Again, in as much as you need b'fon nechta to create the sugi of plugin debura, otherwise there is no sugi of plugin debura. Because you're saying, so why should it matter what it says in the star? Even if it says in the star atzmacha unechasai, nevertheless you should still need a plugin debura, and Abaye should argue even in that case, because Palgina Dibura means, Rabbi is explaining, Palgina Dibura in the Sugya means that there's a kiyum happening on the entire star, and we can't accept a kiyum which should really be happening to the entire star. We can only accept the Legaba Atzma and Legaba Nechasai. So that should even be in the case of Atzma Nechasai.
You say Atzma, you're dividing up the star.
There are no two stars, there's only two Edom. Two Edom are on both. The same two Edom are on both. There are two Edom. I'm being Mekayim the star, which says Atzmacha Nechasai, but it's one kiyum. This kiyum should be working for whatever it says in the star. The kiyum should be good for whatever it says in the star. Right? If the kiyum is a 100% kiyum, and that's where the palginan is, that although it's 100%, nevertheless we'll say that we only believe the kiyum Legaba Atzmacha, not Legaba Nechasai. So what's the difference what the wording in the star is all about? Whether the wording is Atzmacha Nechasai, whether the wording is Kol Nechasai.
It's not really about how much we believe the Eved, because you need to have two Adim to do Kiyum on Shtar. It's the only thing about because of Hashem or whatever, we can then believe him regarding very certain specific things. It's not as though, there's never a minute to say that we believe him 50% and so therefore that's good enough for that, but not good enough for that. We believe him 100%, but it's only within a certain context. Right? So as in the context being is Legabe things to do with him and being free, then he is like two Adim. But like when it comes to about other people's nechasim, then obviously he's not two Edom. So I don't understand what we're saying about him not being full. Obviously,
it's the same star. If it's a 100% kiyum, right? It's the kiyum is 1,000%.
It couldn't, because it requires two Edom to do kiyum.
No, but the Chazal believe them kishnayim.
No, but only regarding things that are between him about his shukrad, about Mishnah Guna, like specific areas.
But don't you need to be mekayim the star? In order to set him free, don't you need to be kind of the star?
But that's
the Edom on the
this
star?
has to do with other things, though, isn't it? Like,
yeah, but if it's...
You split up between Yonim now, I'm saying.
What?
It's one's Mammon.
I understand.
You divide up the star into
but there are only two Edom on the same two in Yonim, there are only two Edom. Now, if those two Edom you consider 100%...
But it's coming up by you, though. It's not coming up by Edom. It's coming up by the Eved testifying...
The Eved is testifying on the Chasimus, the Chasimus of the star, right? So now these two Edom are Edom on both in Yonim, even if it says Atzmacha Nechasai, they're Edom on both in Yonim, right? So now Rabbi is saying that the Palgina that's happening here is, although the Kiyum, the B'fana from Nechtam, is a 100% Kiyum, nevertheless we'll say that, no, it's only Legaba Atzmacha and not Legaba Nechasai. So that's Palgina even in a case where the star has written in it Atzmacha Nechasai. It doesn't really matter what the star has written in it. That's a sugi of Palginin, even where it says Atzmacha Nechasai. So why in the Gemara differentiates that Abaye agrees by Atzmacha Nechasai. Atzmacha Nechasai, everybody else Atzmacha Nechasai Lo Yikana. It's only in the case of Kol Nechasai that Banu the sugi of Palginin Dibura. But according to Rabbi Kiva Eger, why is that so? According to Rabbi Kiva Eger, there's a sugi of Palginin Dibura well before that. The sugi of Palginin Dibura starts as soon as it says B'fana Nechtam, no matter, regardless of what it says in the star. Regardless of the wording in the star, it's a sugi of Palginin Dibura, because there are only two Edom. Those two Edom are now Mekuyim 100%. Nevertheless, we say that we'll only believe them Lagaba the Atzmacha, not Lagaba the Nechas. That's Palgina. That's Palgina. That's really the most difficult question on Rabbi Kiva Eger. The next question is that the Gemara compares. Gemara says Rava Kaman Kerb Shimon the Omer Palgina and Dibura. Right? Gemara wants to compare this machlokes of Abaye and Rava to Reb Shimon and Reb Meir, who argue about Palgina and Dibura. Now, if the sugi according to Rabbi Kiva Eger, the way Rabbi Kiva Eger understands the sugi, is that the Palgina and Dibura here is Lagaba the Nemonis of the Eved. That we're Palgina the Nemonis of the Eved, Lagaba the Atzmacha, and not Lagaba the Nechasai. If that's so what's the comparison to Reb Shimon? Reb Shimon discusses Palgina Dibura. Reb Shimon is not discussing a Nemonis of Kiyim. He's discussing the wording of a star when it says Kol Nechasai, Chutz Mekarka Kolshu. Question is, since he's not getting any karka, does he get himself or no? Because you say Palgina Dibura, but nothing to do with Nemonis, nothing with Nemonis of an Eved, right? Nothing to do with a sugi of Nemonis. And sugi of the wording of a star, could we somehow split up the wording of the shtar of Kol Nechasi and say that the Eved himself is free but nothing else, even though he's supposed to get everything else, all the rest of the Nechasim are not. But it has nothing to do with an Amonis, it has nothing to do with Palgin and Amonis. Rabbi Akiva Eiger is seemingly saying that the Sugi here is handling the Amonis of the Eved. So we're dealing with an Amonis of the Eved, Le'inyi b'fanech v'nechtam, and saying that the Amonis is only good Legabe himself, not Legabe the Nechasim, and we're comparing it to a din, to a Machlokas of Shimon or Meir, which has nothing to do with Amonis. It has to do with the wording in a shtar, Palgin and Dibura. So we're comparing apples and oranges, seemingly. L'chayr, there could be a chilik, we'll speak about it in a minute, but l'chayr, there could be a chilik between the two. Rabbi Akiva Eiger is discussing Palgin and Nimonis. According to Rabbi Akiva Eiger, the sugya of Abai V'Rava is a Palgin and Nimonis the sugya. And the Gemara, when the Gemara is comparing that machlokas to Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Shimon are arguing clearly not in Nimonis. It's not Kiyim, they're not talking about Kiyim B'chlal, they're talking about a case of wording in the shtar. Is the wording in the shtar could have set him free even though he's not getting anything else? Nothing to do with Nimonis. So that's another kasha. And the third and final kasha in Rabbi Akiva Eiger, and that's going to be Be'ezer Hashem, the mafteach, to understand the Rabbi Akiva Eiger. This kasha is really going to be a kasha, but it's going to be the beginning of an answer. Right? If every kasha, if it's good enough, there's a chatzi teretz. So this kasha is going to be the chatzi teretz. That the Achronim Bingaraya, that although there's a machlokas Palgina Debura, but everybody agrees to Palgin and Amonis. What am I saying? What does this mean? Where is the Machlokas of Palgin and Debura in Shas? Machlokas of Palgin and Debura in Shas is in Sanhedrin Daf Tes. The Gemara says, a person says, Ploini Ravani Lortzaini. Right? So the Gemara says, Huva Acher Mitztarfen Laharga. Even though he himself is being made that Ravani Lortzaini, nevertheless he could be an aid. He could be an aid with somebody else to kill the Reveya. So Rav Yosef says, what do you mean? Tashas Yadcha. Him Rasha liyas eid chamas. Doesn't make sense. He's pasal la'edus. As soon as he says L'rtzaini, so he's a Rasha. Right? So once he's a Rasha, he can't be Mekabel as Eidus. So he's not mitztaref from Achel Lahargai. Right? Because he's a Rasha. You don't have to aid him. He himself is not believed to say, Pliny Ravani L'rtzaini. He's saying L'rtzaini, so we can't accept the rest of his Eidus. He's a Rasha. And Rava says no, Palgina Dibura. We'll take his words that Ploini Ravani, and L'rtzaini will drop. Palgina Dibura will drop the word L'rtzaini, and then we'll have Ploini Ravani, and you have two Adam saying that the other fellows are Reveya, and Memela, Huva Achem Etztar from Lahargai. That's Rava's Shita. That's the classic Machlokas Rava and Rav Yosef, whether you say Palgina Dibura or not. Now there's a Mishnah, remember Rava and Rav Yosef Amaroim, there's a Mishnah in Yevalmas Daf Chafei. The Mishnah says, if an aid comes and says that I killed your husband, the Mishnah says, the Gemara is Medaik in the Mishnah, that she's allowed to marry somebody else. She's allowed to marry, based on his Eidus, she's allowed to marry somebody else. So the Gemara says, what do you mean? Based on his Eidus, she's allowed to marry somebody else? He's a Rasha. It's a kasha on Rav Yosef. Rav Yosef says that any time you're made in a way where you, in the Haggadah's Eidus itself, you're making yourself into a Rasha, so you're a Rasha, you can't call whatever you're saying. How could the Mishnah say, Tanakama, that Mishnah, Daf Chafei, and Yevamis, Amid Aleph, say that she's allowed to marry someone else based on his Eidus? It's a kasha on Rav Yosef. Rav Yosef can argue with the Mishnah. So the Gemara says, no, Rav Yosef will answer you, Shani Eidus Isha, Ta'kilu Barabana. By Eidus Isha, they allowed a Rasha, they believed the Rasha to testify, Mishum Aguna. So mainly because they believed the Rasha, that's why he's Naaman. He's a Rasha. You're right, he's a Rasha, but even though he's a Rasha, he's Naaman anyway. So the kasha is, Rabbi Akiva Eiger over there asks, Rabbi Akiva Eiger Daf Chafei asks this kasha, and he says this what I'm about to tell you. Rabbi Akiva Eiger, what do you mean? You're right. So he's a Russian, you can accept his Agada say this. But what about the Nemanos of Ein Adam Mason Atzme Russia? How can he's kosher leidus? He doesn't have the problem of Atoshas Yotchem Russia Lias Eit Chamas. But there's another problem. Problem of Nemanos. Ein Adam Mason Atzme Russia. He can't be believed that I killed her husband because he's making himself into a Russian. So you're right, there's no problem with Toshas Yotchem Russia Lias Eit Chamas. There's no problem in the Kabbalah Eidus. He's kosher leid. But we can't believe him. We can't believe him. We're not going to believe him. Right? So sagt Rabbi Akiva Eiger and many other Achroinim, right, that Rav Yosef, who usually says Loi Palgina Dibura, will nevertheless hold Palgina Nemanis. Palgina Nemanis will agree to. Palgina Dibura he'll argue with. In other words, Ploini Ravani L'Rtsoini, that's a problem of Palgina Dibura because you can't accept the entire Haggadah. You have to drop a word. You have to take L'Rtsoini and drop it. If you believe it, then you can't be Makabal Zaydis because he's a Rasha. He's Pasal Eidus. But when you're kosher L'Eidus, we can be Makabal your Eidus. Just there's another problem. The problem is because now you're not nema to say whatever. We're not going to believe what you're saying. We can't believe what you're saying. So there we'll say like this. We'll say, listen, we'll take your entire Haggadah Eidus and we'll believe you L'Gaba what we need to believe you with. We'll believe you L'Gaba that you can marry somebody else. We're not going to believe you that you're a Russian. Right? So we could take, if he comes and says to Beis, then he says, Ani Raktiv as Bala, right? I killed her husband. So we can makabel the entire Haggadah. There's no problem, right? Because he's kosher leidus, because Shani Eidus Isha, the Kilo Barabana, we can believe that we could accept his entire Haggadah Eidus. Naaman he's not. We're not going to believe him because he's not from Russia. So we'll accept the entire sentence. Legabe what? Legabe allowing her to marry someone else. But to believe the entire Haggadah Eidus, that we're not going to believe. Legabe himself, we're not going to believe him. So that's a Pagina Nemonis already. We can accept the Haggadah, we can accept the Dibur. He's kosher leidus, but it's a Pagina Nemonis. And there he's Moida. And the question is, if Rav Yosef is also Moida, that Pagina Nemonis, so how could the Gemara have machlokas over here in Pagina Nemonis, Abai v'Rava? In Pagina Nemonis, it's a Klora Mishnah, it's often a Mishnah, Rabbi Akiva Eiger is medayik in that sugya, that everybody agrees to Pagina Nemonis. So how can Rabbi Akiva Eiger himself say over here that it's a machlokas between Abai and Rava, whether you say Pagina Nemonis or not? We haven't found such a machlokas, and if it's such a machlokas, then Abai is being chaylik on a Mishnah. For the same reason Rav Yosef can't be chaylik on a Mishnah, Abai can't be chaylik on a Mishnah either. Right? So you have to agree to Pagina Nemonis.
Why can't you just say that Akilu Beravanan with Mishnah Gunas also works for Adam Mesmas from Russia? Why can't we say
you don't need that? You don't need that because once you believe his Haggadah Eidus L'Gaba the Isha, then why should you believe me even L'Gaba himself? You don't need to.
No, but then
say Pagina Nemonis.
No, so
are you saying you don't have to go?
Don't say Pagina Nemonis. Say.
You're saying where is the Rabbi Akiva Eiger coming from in that sugya? What right does the Rabbi Akiva Eiger have to say?
He's bringing up a whole new, maybe a whole new like a whole new idea, just to get around the problem. Why don't you just say Akilu Rabbanan also works for that?
That's an interesting question. Say Pagina, say ein adam, say Shani is Akilu Rabbanan for that also, for that as well. I don't know. I don't know. To look it up again.
So isn't the Ne'emanus different over here? Because you're using the Ne'emanus to split up the Dibur of the Shtar.
Well, what?
The chilek here is that you're using the Ne'emanus to split up the Dibur of the Shtar.
Are you
using his Ne'emanus to split up what the Shtar is saying?
Well, why are you using his Ne'emanus to split up what the Shtar is saying?
But it says Kon Chasei K'nei
right.
You're splitting it up just to Nechosai and Atzimcha.
Like it doesn't say Atzimcha Nechosai, that's called Nechosai.
Yeah, so you're splitting up, using his Ne'emanus to split up what the Shtar is saying.
But Rabbi Akiva Eiger says that you don't need to do that. That's what Rabbi Akiva Eiger began. Rabbi Akiva Eiger began like this. He began, the whole sugya started off like this. He said, if there's no B'fon Nech for a Nechtam, if it's just a sugya of Kol Nechosai, he says you don't have to be Palgin on anything. You could just say that it's, I'm using the term a vulnerable shtar. If you have a better term, we'll use that term. But it's a shtar which is good enough to free the Eved, but it's not good enough to give you the Nechasim. Because the Inyan Nechasim will be Choshesh that it's Mezuyif. The Inyan the Eved will not be Choshesh that it's Mezuyif because it's Meshemeguna. But you wouldn't need Palgina for that. That's to give you started. You don't need Palgina for that. The only reason why there is a Palgina to begin with, Rabbi Akiva Eiger said, is because he says B'fan Nechfan Nechtam, and now it's a 100% Kiyum, so now we have a Kasha. If it's a 100% Kiyum, so it should work for both. It should work for everything. So for the Kol Nechaz itself, you don't really need a Palgina. The Palgina begins only with the B'fan Nechfan Nechtam, and once that's the entire Palgina, so we have all these Kashas. If the Palgina is because of B'fan Nechfan Nechtam,
that's Ne'emanus, right?
Pagina Ne'emanus. So first of all,
that everyone agrees to,
and that everyone agrees. That's the last Kasha we just asked. That's that everybody agrees to.
So our whole question was saying was surely Pagina Dibura starts at V'fana Nechta V'fana Nechta. Wasn't that the second question? According to Ricky, so why do you need this whole case of Kol Nechasai?
Right, that was another question.
So,
Right, that's another
now
question.
say no, that was Pagin and Amonis.
No, but even Pagin and Amonis, once you have Pagin and Amonis, once you need Pagin and Amonis, so why is Abai and Moida to the other case of Atzmach and Nechasai? That's where we asked the first question. Well, how could Abai be Moida to the case of Atzmach and Nechasai? If we're saying you need Pagin and Amonis because of the V'fana Nechta, so how could Abai be Moida to Atzmach and Nechasai? Who cares what the Loshen in the Shtar is if the Eved is Mekayim everything? Right, and the Eved V'fana Nechta, that's Mekayim everything. So, and you need to plug in the Amonis for that, because it's only 2 Eidim with a star. You need to plug in the Amonis.
Two things. There's Dibura plug into plug in the Amonis, so you can just say now. So now there's an totally separate concept of plug in Dibura, which is not about the Amonis, maybe it's more technical sort of splitting up, isn't that the whole... See, because that's Machlokas.
No, but you don't need plug in this. You don't need plug in a Dibura. You don't need plug in. You have to come to plug in a Dibura. That's what Kivegas Hanoch. Because when you have a star, it says Kol Nechasai. I could go free even without giving you the nechasa, because it's a type of star which I'm choishish for ziyah for l'inyan nechasa. I'm not choishish for ziyah for l'inyan the avid. You don't need plugina for that. The only plugina, the whole sugi of plugina only comes in once I require you to say b'fan nechtam, and now it's a good enough kiyum for the entire star. So now I have a kasha. It's a kiyum for the entire star. So why doesn't it work for the nechasim? So you say plugina nemonis. We'll only believe you legabi yourself, but not legabi the star, not legabi the nechasim. So if you need plugina nemonis because of that. So what's the difference what the star, what it says in the star, whether it says Atzmach Nechasa, whether it says Kol Nechasa, anyway you plug in the Amonis. So I'll just finish off with the Vart for Rabbi Chanan. I don't have, this is, again, I don't have a Mahalach here. I'll just tell you what the Rabbi Chanan says. Rabbi Chanan Kavitz says quickly, he's Miyash of all of these, he doesn't ask all of these kashas, but I'm saying with his Mahalach, all these kashas are Miyoshev. He says like this, he says, Avada, Sugi is a Sugi of plug in the Amonis. The Kibbutz is saying, and everybody agrees to plug in the Amonis. It's amazing. Everybody agrees to plug in the Amonis. The Machlokas of Abai and Rava and the Machlokas of Reb Meir and Reb Shimon has nothing to do with plug in the Amonis. It's a whole different Machlokas. The Machlokas goes as follows. If I write in a star, Kol Nechasai, so Yesh Lachter, what happens? Let's say the guy has 1,000 fields and 1,000 avodim, right? So when I'm writing Kol Nechasai in one star, is it one hakna? How are you being kind of all of these things? Is it one hakna? Or is it separate haknais? Each one is a separate kinyan. Are they all one kinyan through this star of Kol Nechasai? They're all one kinyan, or are they all separate kinyanim? So he says like this. He says, if you say that it's one hakna, so everybody agrees to plug in the modus, but plug in the modus is not going to help you. What are you going to say? We'll only believe you, lagaba the Evid, but not lagaba the rest of the Nechasim. Very nice. But it's one akno. You can't split the akno. Even if you'll say plug in Amonis, ma yitin ma yosef lach plug in Amonis, if the kinyan itself, right? The kinyan itself is happening ba'akno achas. So if I can't get the rest of the nechasim, how can I get myself? That's what Abai holds. Abai says it's either or. Avad Abai agrees to the Mishnah in Yevamas that's plug in Amonis is two separate sugyas. Here plug in Amonis, plug in Debura. Our sugyas is a sugya plug in Amonis, and everybody agrees to that. But because you wrote a star which in it says Kol Nechasai, and that gives all the Nechasim ba'akno achas. So if I'm only going to be believed lagaba myself, which I should be, because everyone agrees to plug in Amonis, nevertheless, I'm not going to get the other Nechasim. That means that I'll need to have hakno lagaba the Avin, not lagaba the Nechasim either. Otherwise, how is it going to work? It doesn't work. You can't have that. That's why Abai says either or. Rava says no. Rava understands Kol Nechasai. The Akna is separate kinyanim. There's separate kinyanim going on over here. And that's why Rav is Chalak and Abai, and he learns that plug in the Amonis will help you. Now we asked why Atzmach Nechasai is better according to Abai. The Torah says, of course it's better, because once you have Atzmach Nechasai, even Abai agrees that it's separate kinyanim. Only Kol Nechasai is one kinyan. But Atzmach Nechasai is separate kinyan, so plug in the Amonis is going to help you. Right? And again, what's the comparison to Reb Shimon and the Rabbanan? Reb Shimon and Rabbanan are not dealing with plug in the Amonis. But the answer is, they're dealing with a case of Kol Nechasai. And the Machlokas of Abai v'Rava, the crux of the Machlokas of Abai v'Rava is where the Kol Nechasai is makni you separate kinyanim lagaba each one of the Nechasim or not. And that is exactly the Machlokas of Meir and Reb Shimon. And the Gemara says, Kaman ke Reb Shimon da'am plagina debur, doesn't mean that Reb Shimon holds a plagina debur and argues with Reb Meir that you don't say plagina debur. And Rav and Abai are arguing a plagina debur. Nobody's arguing a plagina over here. It's a case of plagina nemonis. And Rav and Reb Meir, Reb Shimon and Reb Meir are only arguing how the Akna goes about. And according to Reb Shimon, the Akna is a separate akna on each one of the nechasim. So therefore, according to Reb Shimon, you could say Pagina Debura. You could actually say Pagina Debura because it's going to help you. If you say Pagina Debura, then you'll be able to be kaina, whatever you're naman lagabe, whatever you're naman lagabe, whatever you're naman to, and not lagabe, and not lagabe the other things. Mashenk and Rameir. So it's all one sugya. The sugya is basically that chakir. That's what Mechana wants to say. So all the kashas on Yosef. The only thing is the Lashon Gemara. It's so sossam and it's such a. Like to say that's the machlokes of Abai Rav and Rabbi and Reb Shimon. It's a whole chiddush in the sugya to.
Is it not the Rishonim hold like that learn like that? Do they all say it's about Pagina, machlokes about Pagina, don't they?
It's machlokes Rishonim. The Ran learns that this is machlokes Pagina Debura. That's not machlokes Pagina Debura. The Ran says that our machlokes of Abai Rav is like the machlokes of Rav and Rav Yosef for playing Ravana Lotzani. It's the same machlokes.
Right.
Whereas the Ramban here and the Ramban in Makkah, the Ramban in a few places says that two separate sugyas. So with the Ramban's Mahalach, I'm saying that's the Mahalach that's the Mahalach L'chayra of Rabbi Kiva Eger and Rabbi Chonon and many other Achroinim, that two separate sugyas. So that's the Mahalach where Rabbi Chonon is going and explaining the entire sugya. Seder and Shultik for going over time.